Bé, continuem amb la darrera sessió del matí. Com sabeu, Linguapax va néixer com un programa vinculat a la UNESCO i ara funcionem com a organització assessora de la UNESCO. Però és cert que la UNESCO com a tal no té cap departament ni cap programa específic de promoció de les llengües, malgrat que aquest any ha declarat com a any internacional l'any de les llengües indígenes, com ja s'ha dit abans. De tota manera, tot i no tenir un programa internacional, sí que té un seguit d'actuacions en vies de promocionar el que és la diversitat lingüística. Avui ens acompanya aquí el Sebastian Drude. Ell és d'origen alemany, però treballa en aquests moments al Centre UNESCO de categoria 2 de la ciutat de Reykjavik, un centre de multilingüisme, a veure si no ho sé, mira la xuleta, Vigdís International Centre for Multilingualism and Mutual Understanding. And Cultural Understanding, sorry. Ell ha estat fent tot el matí un exercici important d'intercomprensió. És una persona que parla portuguès, parla castellà i s'ha assabentat molt bé de tot el que hem estat dient aquest matí en català. Per tant, ha fet aquest exercici. De tota manera, ara farà la seva intervenció en anglès, que és amb la llengua en què parla habitualment, i ens presentarà, d'una banda, el que és l'activitat del Centre Vigdís, del Centre Internacional de Multilingüisme de Reykjavik, de la seva activitat, i també, en representació de la UNESCO, ens explicarà quins són els objectius de l'any 1919, any de les llengües indígenes. Per tant, thank you very much for accepting being here. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much for the introduction and for the invitation. I feel very bad speaking English after having heard so much Catalan and a little bit of Spanish so far. But I understand there are some people here who want me to speak English because they don't speak very well Catalan or Espanol as well. So I will do this, and I prepared the slides in English as well. Yeah, thanks for the introduction, so I don't have to repeat again the very long title of my institution. It has been built as a building very recently in Reykjavik. This is from a year and a half ago when this building was opened, and I invite you all very much to come. There are many reasons to come, but one of them is even just the architecture of this building, which is winning prizes and is indeed remarkable. It's a wonderful place to work. So that's the new building of the University of Reykjavik, dedicated to languages, and in this building the center where I work is located, alongside with our mothership, so to say, which is the Research Institute on Foreign Languages of the University of Reykjavik. So, as I said, the title is indeed very long. I'm the director of the Vigdís International Centre for Multilingualism and Intercultural Understanding. Usually people lose interest before I finalize my little title, so we usually say the Vigdís World Language Centre. It has been established some 5 to 6 years ago in a contract between the Icelandic government and UNESCO. And it is all around the person of Vigdís Finnbogadóttir, who not only was a very important president of Iceland, but she is also the UNESCO Goodwill Ambassador for Languages. And that is why Iceland is interested, or that is one of the reasons why Iceland said that they want to host such a center dedicated at not only Icelandic, but at the languages of the world. And then, after the economic crisis and other things going on, finally the center has been opened a year and a half ago. That is from some scenes from the opening. Around 1,000 people were present, 500 from abroad, mainly Scandinavian countries, but also from other places in the world. So, now there is this new center. So what does it do? What is it about? It is about, in general, as I see it, linguistic diversity, the contact between languages and cultures. And so to speak, it is a way to continue Vigdís' work as a goodwill ambassador on this topic with an institutional basis. And our message is that languages are important in any society, even in Iceland. This topic has a global perspective, which is endangered languages, especially small languages coming together in nations and states, and in cities, indeed. That is a point which is very important for me as well, and how do these languages get along, and how the different power between languages is played out and can be handled in a way that it does not necessarily harm the weaker members of the linguistic landscape in a region. And there's of course a personal side to it, which is when those languages come together in one individual, and the person who speaks more than one language. And I think all of us here in this room are of this type. And indeed worldwide it is much more common than you would think. I think more than half of the population in the world speaks more than one language, and many speak more than two. There are other topics that all go together and feed into the same general view that languages are important, not only as a marker of their own identity, but also as building bridges between different cultures and identities, and especially in translations, that is expressed very importantly to bring over not only the words, but also the view of another culture when you translate, for instance, a literary work, and how important it is to learn languages. When I present the center, I often speak about my own main topic, which is linguistic diversity, and I will speak some few words about that, but I understand that this is an audience which has heard in the last year especially, but also in other occasions, quite a lot about linguistic diversity worldwide and so forth. So I will go a little bit deeper into one of the themes that we have identified as a theme that the new center can work on and can promote. So the few general words on linguistic diversity is that languages are everywhere, but they are very, very unequal, and one of the most visual inequalities is, of course, language size, the number of speakers. And if you plot the languages according to their size, then on one hand you have Mandarin with almost a billion speakers by now, and on the other hand you have languages which have only one or very few speakers. And the distribution, what you get is almost a regular Gauss curve or normal distribution, and it is a property of such a distribution that at the highest point, you have the point where half of the individuals that you are classifying fall to the right and half fall to the left. So that highest point is the number of speakers, where half of the languages have more than this number and half of the languages have less than this number. And I usually ask my students, for instance, or my audience in the last years, what they think where this number lies for the global language sphere. And I usually get answers like, yeah, 1 million, and some audacious will say, oh, perhaps it's just 100,000. But actually, that value for the world is 7,000. So half of the languages in the world have less than 7,000. And in that context, it is, I think, a very fortunate thing that, for instance, UNESCO has decided, or the UN has decided, to dedicate a year to indigenous languages, because most of the languages which fall left on this divide are indeed indigenous languages, which is a problematic term to begin with, because every language is indigenous to some place. England is the indigenous language, English is the indigenous language of England, so what makes a language an indigenous language, so to speak? Is Icelandic an indigenous language? Yeah, sort of, isn't it? So, but there's also an aspect of being a minority language in order to be an indigenous language. So there are some aspects. It has to be a native language of a place, but it has also be in contact with a stronger language which came later, some colonial or other language. And in that sense, we all become indigenous languages in comparison to English, which is, at least in the digital domain, now the dominant language worldwide. So there are some interesting twists to this topic about indigenous language, but I will come back to that. Of course, you all know about linguistic diversity being endangered, and that has been here said at Linguapax and so forth many, many times, so I don't have to repeat this, but I will show you a few pictures of my own backgrounds. So I used to be a field worker working on one indigenous language in Brazil. The language is called Avechi, and these are pictures from my former life as a field worker, doing especially language documentation. So I recorded a lot of the old oral traditions, and I made that available, working with the speakers themselves to transcribe, to translate it, to archive it in well documented. Here is where this language is spoken. It is in Brazil, in the very center of Brazil, where you see the Mato Grosso, the Xingu indigenous area, which is very visible because that's the only not deforested area in Mato Grosso. And there, right in the center, there's the Cruzeiro River, the windmill curves, and then you see the little Avechi village, where when I arrived there, some 90 people live, and by now there are 200, and now they have 3 different villages. It is a typical Brazilian language, so to say. It has, as I said, around 200 speakers, and it is threatened. Although at this point, I guess all children in the village learn Avechi as their first language. There is a dramatic shift in interest to learn Portuguese, to go to the cities, to have schools, to be successful in the broader Brazilian society. So, although, as I say, the language is vital at this point, I really wouldn't guarantee that for the next 50, let alone the next 100 years. And in that sense, I'm quite critical about the countings which were cited earlier here, that UNESCO says, okay, there are 7,000 languages and it's 260, I don't know, 2,600 something, 80 languages are endangered. I think that number is way too low, because even if a language right now is active in the sense that all children in the community are acquiring the language, it is not really sure that this will be the case in 20 years or in 2 generations and so forth. So the wake-up call from 1992, when linguists start to realize that languages are in danger, was that at the end of this century we will lose half of the languages, and then within some 2 or 3 generations more we will probably lose 90%. And I think this is still a more realistic figure than to say a third of the 7,000 languages is in danger right now. It's many, many more. And the question is, of course, how do we deal with languages in a changing environment? In Brazil, the changing environment is the coming technology, and what do you do with it? And the challenge is to employ it in a way that it is used for the indigenous languages themselves, so that the speakers strengthen their own language instead of handing over their linguistic competencies and trying to learn Portuguese. And that is happening. Even in the last years of my fieldwork, speakers approached me and said, actually, I'm thinking here, why exactly should I learn Portuguese? Shouldn't I be learning English? That's where all the information is. That's where everything goes. And this is a small village in central Brazil. So again, the change is very quick and very drastic, and speaker sees it. So it's a challenge in many different environments to maintain languages as a mark of identity, as something to be proud of, as something which brings you strength. And that holds in the cities of Europe, the same in villages in Africa or other countries in the tree continent. Coming back to Iceland, that seems a very improbable place, because I used Iceland as an example of a place where probably only 1 native language is spoken. One of the very few countries where you could suspect that. That's actually not true. This is a representation of the Grotolog data, the big data bank of all languages in the world, maintained by linguists. So it's a similar thing like their Ethnologue. And they have 2 dots for Iceland. And the second native language of Iceland is, of course, the Icelandic sign language. And in many cases that holds, that there is a sign language besides the oral traditional language. So there are 2 native languages in Iceland, but they feel, and that is one reason why they are so interested in linguistic diversity, they feel threatened by English. It is probably the Scandinavian country which mostly uses English. This is not on this map, unfortunately. This is only for the EU. But if you would put Iceland on that map of speaking English daily or very well, Iceland would probably score very, very high. Children learn English before they go to school. They are on Netflix, they are on YouTube, they are on multimedia, they are surfing the internet, they speak English before they go to school nowadays. They don't learn it very well for an academic or professional purposes, but they know English very, very well. And in Iceland, more and more, people work who don't speak English, who don't speak Icelandic, like me. And as an Icelander, if you go to Reykjavik and buy a coffee or buy a t-shirt, it is quite probable that you are served by a person who can't do that in Icelandic with you. So you are forced to speak English in Reykjavik in order to get central services. And that is a concern. In academia, of course, that's a global phenomenon. Many courses are taught in English, and many people come and don't learn Icelandic and study there, but especially in this cyberspace, of course, English is very strong. And among children, speaking English is hip. And children have been asked, and many answered that they think for them, for their future, it is more important to speak English well than to speak Icelandic well. And that is language endangerment. Even if the Icelandic language is a national language with TV and government and schools and all what you want, there is an attitude shift. And for me, that is the most important indicator for linguistic endangerment. If people, if the value or the attention that the language gets, the positive attitude changes, that is the point where a language starts to be endangered. It's not sure that the children will indeed pass on Icelandic as the first language to their children at that point. But of course, Iceland is also a very typical place when it comes to immigration, and we have heard so much of it, and I think it is very unfortunate. It's very fortunate that I'm here, because I would like to make partnerships on this topic as well, because that's a topic in Iceland as well. They have asked the Icelandic children in schools, which language do you speak at home? And even in small places where there are only 230 students or pupils in a school, they got 14 different answers, and for all Iceland they got almost 100 different answers. And Iceland is just a so many times now. It's just a neighborhood of Barcelona. It's whole Iceland has 330,000 people. Reykjavik is a city of 120,000 people, but there are 100 languages spoken in Iceland. So what does the center do? We organize a lot of events. We have lectures, we show films. We had a music event recently. We had a speaker from an Alaskan language, Yupik, presenting traditional and hip-hop music in his own Yupik language. We promote language learning and exchange of languages by Café Lingua events, which are events where people come and practice their languages. So there's a table for German and a table for Danish and a table for even Chinese or Arabic. And native speakers can teach their language and learners can learn it. There's a strong table of Icelandic, which I frequent when I'm there. We promote research on these topics of multilingualism, language diversity, and so forth. And we have a special focus, which are maps, which I have proposed. And I will have to accelerate a little bit to give still some time for the lunch break, because I think that maps are important for all that what we have discussed. The multilingual cities are missing on our language maps, and much more is missing on language maps. We have language maps like this one, and this is already fine because we find Basque and Catalan. There are many other maps where you even won't find those. But a lot of our information is missing. There are historical maps of migrations of tribes, so that is a map which I admire, and this map just has burned down in the National Museum in Rio 2 months ago, if you perhaps remember. There are typological maps, which I also find fascinating. Maps are wonderful communicators. People stop before maps and they look at places they know and they connect with them, and it's a wonderful way to transmit information. You can transform maps. This here, for instance, shows each country by the size of each country by the number of languages spoken there. So Papua New Guinea wins, and Nigeria is very strong, and India and Indonesia and so forth. Maps can be connected with other kind of information, so you can have, for instance, here this linguistic map of France. You can hear the same story told in the different dialects and languages of France if you click on the things. You can walk through a language forest and hear the different languages spoken in islands close to Papua New Guinea in this case. But in general, language maps are really pure, and if you are lucky, you have a map where there are some areas which are hatched, so to show, oh, here's more than one language spoken, and that the same probably would hold for Catalonia. And the other type of language map that I know shows only one dot per language. This is the UNESCO Atlas of Languages in Danger, one dot per language. And again, the language is not spoken in one location. Even small languages usually have some kind of diaspora. People have moved, so the language has some significance somewhere. Depending on there are other maps like this. This is the Glottalog map, which I mentioned earlier. But you should show so much more. For instance, this map of Canada is at least interactive, or at least it shows the different languages of Canada, the native languages, and English, and French, and shows how strongly they are. This shows much more than a static distribution of here's French, here's English, and here's Inuit, and that's that. More realistic is even a heat map where you see the density of speakers, for instance. You don't find that in usual language maps. The multilingual cities. There are some projects which try to show diversity. So this here is a map of Reykjavik. Or here, this here is an attempt of mapping the diversity of a street in Manchester, where many shop owners and people living there come from other regions, and they try to show it, connecting it with a map, but these are only first attempts. There are other kind of maps like this map which can be updated once per second, which shows each tweet given in a different language, and the colors show the different languages used. So Spain, you see the Catalonia tweets much more than the rest of Spain for some reason. Even though you see the linguistic borders and also the strength of Catalan in Madrid, for instance, or the use of Basque in other regions, even in the south of Catalonia, of course. So this is something that you could show. So there are different domains, and what you want is to see the language used. Where are languages taught? Where are they translated? Where are they official? Of course, where there are native speakers, but also where is the diaspora? Where are children acquiring the language, and so forth. All these different domains can be portrayed on maps. So what I propose is to have for each language a set of multi-layered maps which show the different domains, and then that can be used to combine and to see the complexity of our worldwide linguosphere. We are working on an exposition on these topics, especially now first on the West Nordic language landscape, and we are very much looking out for cooperation, so please get in contact if you think that you work on things which are related and we could do things together. This was the first part of my talk where I presented the center and one of its activities, the map team a little bit more. We had a wonderful conference last August from the Foundation for Endangered Languages. I understand that Nicolas Hostler was here last year. He is the president of that association. And this year's conference was dedicated to languages and the land and mapping multilingual landscapes. And we got a wonderful group of people together who formed a network, and we are preparing projects on the topic of developing more realistic, more interesting, more engaging language maps which show all the intricate patterns of multilingualism and diaspora and what have you. The second part is much shorter. I will very briefly introduce this International Year of Indigenous Languages, the official year, next year, 2019 is it. And yeah, I have put some slides together because I have been involved in this from the sideline and a little bit participating. It all started some years ago when the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues asked the UN, or proposed to the UN, to dedicate a year as one of the actions to indigenous languages. And indigenous languages needed more attention. Again, after a short very intense time, around 2000, I would say, 2000 to 2005 or so. There was a lot of interest in endangered languages, linguistic documentation and so forth. Since then, it has dropped dramatically, I would say. And that was one attempt to dedicate more attention to this topic. Driving forces behind that were especially the states of Ecuador and Bolivia, who are multilingual countries, which are interesting because they are dealing with their internal diversity in a more proactive way, I would say. And then in 2016, the UN General Assembly made a resolution, the Resolution 71-178, which establishes the next year as the official year of indigenous languages. So we are all interested in this topic of language, and it's not only indigenous languages, I would say. Once you get into that, I think it's already difficult to draw the line what indigenous languages are. I remember, I don't know if you were there, 2 years ago in Paris, we had a preparation meeting for this, and the first person from the floor to stand up and make a comment was a representative of the Chinese government. And he would say, yeah, well, we find this all very interesting, but of course this concept of indigenous languages is very outlandish for us. There are no indigenous languages in China. So that was the first statement from the floor. But he agreed then that the topic should be understood in a way that minority languages, and that is what they accept to have in China, would also be included in this. And I think this is a first step. So, and I would also say that immigration languages, so minority languages in a diaspora context, are certainly something which will be addressed and should also get under this umbrella of the year of indigenous languages. Because as I say, after all, every language is an indigenous language somewhere. It might not be a non-hegemonic or a majority language, but it is when there is some contact between a strong language and a weak language, then you start to speak of indigenous languages, but it is not necessarily the only thing which is interesting to speak of in this context. There are a lot of formalities, and I'm actually rather critical about many of the mechanisms of the UN and UNESCO, and what we have heard here, especially from Jordi, just made a very strong point in this. Exactly there you are. It's not only a lot of bureaucracy, and it is a lot of bureaucracy, but it is also a certain agenda and a certain view on what is important in the world. And it is no coincidence that culture is missing in that, and that under the 16 development goals there is very, very little on social issues beside inequality, and it is no word on culture whatsoever. And I find this extremely dangerous. I'm very critical of some other of those points as well, but that's for a discussion over a beer. But so I will present this as good as understood how the mechanisms of the UN work. So they involve, of course, 3 bodies which I have found, which all are concerned with indigenous peoples, and I think that is a good thing, because as we say, languages should not be, how do I say this in English, reified? So made to a thing, yeah? And at least the institutions they involve, they are concerned with indigenous peoples. And I think that is the first very important step in this area. And they did, of course, the obvious thing to ask UNESCO to be responsible, the responsible UN body to deal with this indigenous languages year and to prepare it. Although I must say, we are a UNESCO center, and we are looking for the right part of UNESCO, the right department to deal with. And some 10 years ago that would have been easy, because within the cultural department there was, or within the cultural sector, there was a department on languages. And and so forth. So things are going on in UNESCO for languages, it's fine, but the department for languages doesn't exist anymore. And not even in the context of the preparation of 2019, when I made the proposal to re-establish a dedicated sector within UNESCO who would deal with languages. That is politically apparently not possible. So languages are now dealt with partially in the cultural heritage sector, and that is the reification of languages. Oh, this is a heritage, we must preserve them, and that is that. It's no word about the speakers. Or it is about education, which is a very narrow view of languages, or it is about the information society and how to include, how to create a Unicode alphabet for that other language in India also. So I think UNESCO should do more for languages as it is, and it is good that this year comes to remind them of that. What they did is to create an action plan for the next year, and it is a long document with with many sections which explain how this all works and so forth. And then there's also a little bit of the content, so what are the objectives and the impact, the main areas of intervention, the key outputs, and how you can participate. And I think these two things, the main areas of intervention and how to participate, is most interesting for this audience. But again, if you read through the document, there is a lot of technical, political, formal language, and very little about concrete actions that can be taken on the ground. And we all know UNESCO, they have, I guess, a lot of goodwill from the people who work there, but very little money beyond their own big bureaucracy. So there is no money from UNESCO, but they hope that there will be international cooperation and that many people and institutions worldwide contribute to the international year. That's basically the plan. They themselves will organize 1 or 2 larger events and conferences, and they will have the central platform, but otherwise it will be on our shoulders to actually promote indigenous languages and do something about them during that year. So then they have knowledge sharing and dissemination of good practices with regard to indigenous language. I think this is one of the most interesting parts, because we have learned a lot over the last 20 years about how to strengthen languages, how to revitalize languages, how to include languages on the national agenda, and we have heard that there is still a long way to go, even within the multilingual cities in the force. But I think that is something where there is knowledge, and to make this knowledge better known and applied is an important step. Then to include indigenous languages in standards, and there is still something to do, I would say. Empowerment through capacity building, that is a very strong point, but very little concrete things which are proposed in the document. And then growth and development through elaboration of new knowledge. That is what they propose. Go through the document, it is some 15 pages. And what they have done so far is to set up a wonderful website where you have different banners which explain what this international year is and what indigenous languages, why they are important and so forth. But again, this year are the same graphics that we know from the 16 development goals or sustainable development goals and so forth. So yeah, it's very little about the languages spoken by speakers. Well, there is some rights and aspects and so forth, but otherwise that's it. There's a little bit of information about the year itself and the 5 things where there will be active and call for action, and then you can get involved. And that means you can register, especially, yeah, of course they say who participates, and there are some governments who support this more strongly, and it is not the obvious candidates. Within Europe, France is probably one of the countries with the most restrictive language policy, French only. They are now changing a little bit to Basque and Breton and so forth, but in general, and also Saudi Arabia is not the first candidate that I would think of to promote linguistic diversity. But also a very strong player in this is China now. China is trying to promote itself as a strong member of the UN, and they are doing interesting things about working with their own languages. So those contributions are essential for this year to make any impact. And what you can do is especially to register your organization and then to register your events so that they will be visible on the website, and many people can join and can be informed about your contribution. And I'm pretty sure that Linguapax and the Vigdís World Language Center will be present on this event map. We are planning to promote one indigenous language per week. So we will have the Language of the Week initiative, where we offer information about the background of some randomly chosen indigenous language of the world once per week. That is one of the initiatives that we are thinking, or that we are preparing for. In 6 weeks it starts. So thank you very much for your attention.
For your presentation and for interesting points. We have still 10 minutes for questions. If you have any question, you can raise it now. Or maybe you are all very tired.
We are a little bit behind time, so perhaps it's lunchtime for people.
No questions? So,
please get in contact personally.
Okay. So we will have 2 hours for dinner, for lunch, sorry. The ones who are wanting to attend the presentation after lunch, about 3 hours, no? 3 what? 3 o'clock. I said you have 2 hours for lunch. No, it's not.
Listen. At 1 o'clock. Yeah.
At 1 o'clock, yeah, sorry. Okay, thank you. Okay, at 3 o'clock we have the next presentation about languages and spirituality. The ones who are attending, please be here at 3. The others, have a nice day.